Tonight, I'm honored to be speaking with the author of A.M.E.N, The Religion of Vaccine, lawyer and RFK Jr.'s key advisor, Aaron Siri. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Obviously, we have to talk about what happened yesterday with the CDC's new overhaul of the children vaccination schedule. But before we go, I want to throw a warm-up question for you.
Sure.
So we'll get started with an easy one, but it's one that we need to address. What do you think are the top 3 lies that we're being told about vaccination?
The top 3 lies about vaccinations overall. One is that without vaccines in the U.S., millions of kids would die every year. That's off by probably 99.9%, as I make clear in Chapter 7 of my book. The other lie is that they're the most thoroughly, tested products before they come on the market. They're probably the worst and least tested products of any drug before they get on the market, as I lay out in Chapter 10 of my book. And that post-licensure safety is robust, which is nonsensical, as I go through Chapter 11. So, those would be my top 3 off the top of my head.
Why do you think those lies are even allowed? Because if I own a business and I lied about my product, openly lie about it, I'd be in trouble.
When you lie about the product, the way you end up getting sued often is when the product then causes some kind of harm, right? That will get roped into that lawsuit. Yeah. And so when it comes to vaccines, childhood vaccines, they are the only product where you cannot sue the pharma company to claim that had you made that product safer, my kid wouldn't be dead. My kid wouldn't be seriously injured. I wouldn't be seriously injured. It is the only product in the United States that has that kind of permanent immunity. That's it. It's the only one. And the product, they tell you, is completely safe. That immunity came about in 1986 in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. And so what you've had is basically 40 years of just almost no pushback. When you read about a car causing an issue, how does that come about? It comes about because they got sued. And so then the papers report about the class action lawsuit. You're not going to read about that for vaccines. You can read about that for drugs, but not vaccines.
Do you think the government should be protecting them? Because that's a great point you're talking about. And I'm from Canada. It's the exact same way here. We actually have a program that will help, at least try to help, vaccine injured by providing them taxpayers' money. I love the way you're smiling right now. I see the smirk. And it just baffles me, as you said, that this is the only industry really that is protected against lawsuit. Not only that, but we're responsible as taxpayers to pay for the troubles that it actually creates.
If vaccines are so safe, why do they need that immunity? Why? If they're so safe, why do they need it? And after 30, 40 years for some of these vaccines, they still need the immunity? You still don't know they're safe enough? Come on, don't be a fool. Only a fool would accept that, well, they need the immunity because, look, it's simple. Leading up to 1986, there were 3 routine vaccines. That's it. DTP, MMR, and OPV. That's all there is. A child following the CDC schedule in 1986 would have gotten 3 injections by their first birthday. That's it. That's it. Nothing else. Up until 2 days ago, it was 25 injections. As of yesterday, it's 18 injections, including in utero. So we're getting better, less. With that said, why did the 1986 Act law get passed? Because those 3 products were causing so much harm, so much injury, that all the companies stopped making them or went out of business. They were down to 1 manufacturer each for the pertussis, measles, and polio vaccine, from 3 to 6 different manufacturers for each. Now, a lot of industries face this crossroads. It happens. Cars start blowing up, so you make a better gas tank so they don't blow up, right? Plane doors start coming off. You make better bolts. Your sheetrock in your house causing cancer. You make better sheetrock. You're using asbestos. You stop using, you make a better product. This happens all the time. But in this one instance, instead of letting the economic self-interest of the company drive these pharma companies to make a better, safer product, Congress decided in its wisdom, politicians, to instead do something unprecedented, gave them immunity and said, you know what? You don't need to make a better product. You don't need to make a safer product. We'll just make it so the parents of these dead and injured children just can't sue you. And they didn't do it just for those 3 products. They did it for any other routine childhood vaccine developed thereafter. Every single vaccine that is currently on the CDC childhood schedule, save one, which existed pre-86, was trialed and licensed by a pharma company knowing that they wouldn't be responsible for the injuries and the deaths based on the claim they could have made the product safer. And that's why with drugs, you have multi-year placebo-controlled trials before licensure because they want to know if it's safe. They don't want to lose money. With vaccines, you end up with ridiculous trials that often review with not a single one of the routine injected childhood vaccines was licensed in a trial based on with a placebo control. Not only that, if they did use a vaccine as a control, that wasn't licensed based on a placebo. But even if they used a placebo in those trials, they didn't review safety long enough, often days or weeks compared to the years. And even if they had reviewed safety long enough and used a placebo, they're often underpowered, meaning not enough kids. These trials are a joke. We need good clinical trial data when we go to bring claims for those injured by vaccines. We can't sue the manufacturer, but like you have in Canada, there is a little federal program that you can bring a claim in. We have to prove the vaccine causes the injury. We need good clinical trial data. It doesn't exist.
So let's talk about what most consider the most radical shift in U.S. public health policy in over 40 years. As of yesterday, January 5th, 2026, the CDC officially scrapped the one-size-fits-all model for several major vaccines when it comes to children vaccination. We can break it down, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can break it down in 3 parts: the reduction of the vaccine schedule, the new 3-tier framework, and the Denmark model that you guys are trying to emulate. So you're reducing the amount, you said 23 to 18, you said, because the numbers I was seeing were 17 to 11. So I have a list of vaccines here like Hep B, Hep A, flu, COVID-19, rotavirus, the RSV. You guys are removing that from the childhood schedule, but
they're making
you
it
are
not routine.
So you're removing it from the routine schedule, and but you're keeping the measles, mumps, rubella, polio, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hip, pneumococcal, chicken pox, and HPV, correct?
Those will remain on the routine schedule. The 5 that you mentioned are going to be moved to something called shared clinical decision making. So they will still be on the schedule. They just won't be part of the routine schedule. And the difference in the numbering is I'm doing it by the number of injections. You're doing it by the diseases. So when I said it went from 3 injections to 25 and now back down now to 18, that's the difference, up by 1 year of age. By the way, if you go to the full schedule, 1986, you had 7 total injections for the full CDC schedule. It was over 50 as of 2 days ago. It's now around 25 as of yesterday. So still a growth. And if I can say, if I may, you said that this is the most radical change, right, in the history relating to vaccines.
That's what they call it. That's not necessarily what I think, but that's what they call it.
Can I tell you what the most radical change is? The most radical change is going from 3 to 25 routine without any actual accountability or liability or economic self-interest of the companies to make sure they're safe. That's radical.
I completely agree. I tend to use what mainstream media is saying as kind of a pun. It's kind of a joke because I totally agree with you. Bringing it from 3 to 25 is way crazier than saying, oh, how about we go back to a time where we didn't need that many vaccines? But the question I have for you, though, is why keep some and remove others? Why keep some at all?
Well, I agree that they should all be shared clinical decision making. That is the basics of medical ethics. This review, if you read the underlying report, it makes clear. It says it's not addressing the consensus vaccines. So this report, this round really is just addressing the non-consensus vaccines, the 5 effectively that became non-routine. So for the others, it just wasn't really addressed in this round. I'm assuming it will be in a future round.
Okay, so it's just basically it's just for the time being. But the goal, in your opinion, you know what? I'll keep that question for the third part, the Denmark model, because this is a question I had for you. So the second part of your framework is your 3-tier framework, as you were just mentioning. So you have the routine, you have the risk base, and then you have your shared clinical decision making. Claire, to explain to that in layman's term for the people listening.
Well, for the ones that are on the routine, those are, as I just explained, I think they're just weren't addressed this round.
Yeah.
For the ones that are risk-based, for high-risk populations, those were already listed for high-risk populations on the schedule. And so they kind of, I guess, kept that second category. Then there was the ones they took off the routine schedule, and those got put into the shared clinical decision-making. So I think that's kind of how it evolved. I mean, if you ask me, it should just be one category, shared clinical decision-making for everything. Risk, high risk, let that determine it in the medical office or whatnot. You know, we need to bring vaccines back into the world of medicine and get it out of the world of politics. And the only way to do that is to depoliticize vaccines, no mandates, get the government out of the involvement, and just leave it for decision-making in the medical office between the doctor and the patient. And that should be the end of it.
So basically, it's safe to assume that you believe in going from automatic to a discussion approach. Basically, you want to restore informed consent, because that's what I'm all about. That's why I record this type of content, is to give the parents out there, or the mothers that are expecting, or the expecting parents, to have information, both sides of the story, and to decide for themselves and for their children what they want to do. But I strongly believe in the option. You want to do it, great. You don't want to do it, great. You're not going to be mocked. You're not going to be, because in Canada, our healthcare is provided by the federal government. And there are people during COVID, I'm unvaccinated, and they didn't get surgeries. They literally died because they did not get the surgeries they needed because they were unvaccinated. So is it safe to say that you just want to restore that doctor to patient relationship? Because since COVID, we have to agree that that relationship has been destroyed. A lot of people have lost faith in doctors. They're not on the pedestal that they used to be on for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
So I completely agree that anybody who wants a vaccine should be free to get it. That's freedom. Canada, America. Yep. You want to get a vaccine, you should get as many as you want. You should be able to wear 60 masks if you want. You should be able to live in your basement in a self-imposed stay-at-home order forever. I support anybody's right to do that. You're 18, totally healthy, no comorbidities, and you want to get a vaccine a day and live in your basement, America, Canada, freedom, great. But at the same token, nobody should ever be coerced to get these products. And what that means is this: the right to informed consent means I inform you of the risks and benefits, and you choose whether to consent. If I say no, and then you say fine, but you don't get to go to school, you don't get to have a job, you don't get to go that destroys consent. That is destructive to the right of informed consent. That is illiberal. It is a violation of individual and civil rights. So yes, everybody should have access if they want it. Everybody should get as many as they want, but nobody should ever be coerced. There should never be any mandates or coercion.
Do you think it's possible to restore the trust we had in doctors? At least when I say we, I'm really talking about me and people that are similar to me, as in I question absolutely everything. I don't believe what everybody tells me. It's just a place I start my research, and I'm like, okay, where do I go from here? But I question. I don't care who you are. I will question what you say. But do you think it's possible to restore that trust that doctors had?
Yeah, they need to depoliticize vaccines. They need to get vaccines and medicine out of politics. And by that, here's what I mean. People aren't going around and making lots of fights about statins. Okay. You want to get a statin, get a statin. You don't get a statin, you don't get a statin, right? Heart disease is the number one killer of Americans. 900,000 Americans die every year of heart disease. You want to talk about something that's clogging up the medical system, right? Remember that? Oh, you're going to clog up the medical system. Everybody's going to die because of your clog. Well, you know what really is clogging up the medical system? Heart disease. 900,000 Americans. I don't know what it is in Canada. I'm sure it's the number one killer too, I'm going to guess, okay?
100%.
And so does that mean we're going to mandate statins? Are we going to mandate other kind of heart interventions so that we can No, you intuitively recognize that that's destructive to individual and civil rights. Most people are, but with vaccines, people have lost that ethos. And the problem is that who do mandates harm? Who do vaccine mandates? Do they impact those who want them? No, they're going to get them anyway. So who does it harm? It harms the very people who have a reason to not get it, either because they have a personal negative experience or they learned something they can't unlearn. And so what does that do? That creates a distrust, a fight that shouldn't exist. It should be based on medicine, but now you've inserted politics into it. Most parents who choose to not vaccinate usually have a really good reason, from my experience. They don't just wake up one day and say, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to take a socially ostracized position that's going to get me called an anti-vaxxer, anti-science, a quack, thrown out of school, thrown out of my job, disinvited to play dates, you name it, blah, 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 go down the list of pejoratives. No, people usually have a very powerful experience and they have, or they've learned something they can't unlearn. And despite the billions of dollars that the federal government and Canada and the US spent to persuade them that vaccines are essential, critical, safe, effective, you got to get them, they're not doing it, right? And so what does mandates do? It destroys that relationship. And then when these same parents and these adults go and they do their own homework and they read the clinical trial data, they look at the post-legislative paper, they get an actual a look at the primary sources, and then they go meet their doctor who typically knows nothing about these products. Oh, then they really destroy any trust they have in the medical system. So you got to get these products out of politics.
You know, one of the questions that came out of the comment section is, do you think that there should be accountability for the mandates that were put in place in 2020? Like, as a lawyer, because that's what you do, right? Should there be accountability? Because we all know that that would be a great place to start, at least rebuild that trust. It's a lot easier to trust people if you know that they're going to be liable for their actions. When you know that they can't be, yeah, I'm not going to trust you. As we talked about the vaccination industry.
Well, what are you trying to say, Nico? You know, because are you saying that if you go to a car dealership and you walk in and you say, what's the warranty? They say no warranty. If you're injured, you can't sue us ever. We don't stand behind our car financially. You're saying that maybe you may not want that car? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. If you read between the lines, yeah.
I mean, listen, a lot of parents, there are parents who, usually, especially if they're unfortunate, have had an adverse experience. When they understand that these companies don't stand behind their own products, you'll hear, I've heard parents say, is it really wise? Is it really wise if the company won't stand behind the product for me to inject it into my kid? So there's a nonprofit group, I-Can Enforcement Action Network, that funds a lot of our vaccine policy work. We have about 50 people in my firm that just do vaccine related work. We do other stuff, but we do everything vaccine related, exemptions, immigration, for vaccine exemption. We do everything. Injuries, you name it. And on the I-Can website, there's a form that they have that you could take to your pediatrician's office and you can ask them to sign to say, will you be liable if there's a harm? And you can mail to the manufacturer to ask them to sign and send back to you to agree to be liable. Good luck waiting for those things to come back signed.
But do you think, as Lori Shea, one of our commenters, is saying, as a mother of a vaccinated injured from the poison, I think there should be accountability, transparency, truth, and justice. And we're starting somewhat to see transparency. Truth, we're going to have more and more of it as we talk, conversations like we're having right now. But what, because I want to go back to that accountability. Should doctors, should policymakers be held responsible for the potential damage that they have caused children, the coercion that parents, because you've seen those videos out there, they break my heart to see a father having their child sitting on their lap as they're getting vaccinated and the big muscular guy's just crying like a little girl because that child is in pain. I'm crying because I know what he's doing to his child and he's still doing it. But
how about the kid in Cali who's in a wheelchair from transverse myelitis from a vaccine and then he gets thrown out of school because he won't take more? How about that
so
family?
should 100%. And I work for another. I work with another organization that's what we do in Canada. We go after the government regarding what happened, but where's the accountability? At one point, some people need to be held accountable. Do you think that's possible? Is it even possible to hold them accountable?
Well, it matters, and there are varying degrees. So in terms of financially holding vaccine manufacturers and pharma companies accountable for the injuries they cause, very difficult because of the National Child Vaccine Injury Act in the United States, and I believe there's a similar law to some degree in
Yep.
Canada. And so that's very, very difficult. In terms of government officials, unfortunately, they also are sit behind a shield of immunity for the policies that they implement. And this is why I focus on removing mandates and restoring personal choice. Because are we going to be able to get pharmaceutical companies to do proper clinical trials? Tough, really tough. And to do that, we have to repeal the immunity. Are we going to get that done? Got 1,000 lobbyists here for pharma. There are 0 vaccine safety lobbyists. You're probably not getting the 86 Act repealed. You're probably not going to be able to get them to do proper clinical trials. Are you going to get the FDA to actually stop being a pom-pom cheerleader for these products and actually be a regulator? Tough. Are you going to get the CDC to do its job when it's focused on promoting and defending vaccines? Tough. Right? So what's the last line in this train of horribles? The last line is your ability to say no. That's the last line on that train, is the parent's ability to say no. They can't necessarily fix all those things, but they can hopefully say no. And so that's why I focus on being able to make sure every parent has the right and has the ability to say no. Get it if you want, but not vote. Now, for those who are injured, I completely understand they're already injured. What about justice? It's difficult. The first step to getting there is obviously recognizing and acceptance, especially at a federal government level, that they have had policies that caused an incredible amount of injury. And hopefully under, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., we're going to get there. And maybe from there, it could lead to some kind of accountability. But the legal tools to do that are very limited. I will say this, for what it's worth, sometimes accountability doesn't come in this life. Maybe it comes in the next.
That, unfortunately, if you look at history, that unfortunately tends to happen. It's not you get accountability not for the people that are still alive. They normally have passed away, but such as, I get your point. Not that I'm not happy that that's the answer you're given, not because I don't agree with it, because unfortunately I do agree with what you're saying. Trying to change all of those laws, all of those policies, the way that big pharma does business and the way they're protected. And there's a good reason Biden expanded it. Didn't he expand that protection for 10 years? And one of the last things that he did
Yeah.
before, yeah. So
Well,
I'm
you're
right.
talking about the PrEP Act, which is a different level of protection too. It's a whole nother layer on top of the 86 Act that he extended for 10 years for the co-vaccines.
Yep.
You know why, Nico? They're doing you a favor. See, they're so safe. They're just making sure you don't waste your time suing for the injuries. See, you got to appreciate look. On the bright side, that's not to say that things aren't moving in the right direction. I would like to. I mean, I've certainly think things are moving in the right direction quite rapidly, far more rapidly than I think most folks would have imagined just a few years ago.
So you're trying to see the good and not focus too
Oh,
much
there
on
is
the
good.
bad. Yeah.
Oh, there's a ton of good. Look, half the states in America, I don't know what it's like. I know in Canada it's a tougher situation, but I can tell you half the states in the United States right now, around half, have passed laws, executive orders, judicial decisions that protect individual rights around these products, right? that restrict the ability for government actors to require them, whether it's COVID vaccine, whether it's masks, whether it's other vaccines. Florida is getting rid of all their vaccine mandates right now. There are AGs in America who are suing Pfizer and some Moderna over some of the COVID vaccine related matters. You have, cases that when I brought a lawsuit 7-8 years ago, I've been doing this for a decade, it was very tough to get, judges are very, very busy, and it's tough to be, they rely on their cultural cognition. So it's, very tough to get them to look and say, no, this vaccine doesn't stop transmission, because they got to get through their docket. Where today, half the judges in the country are, I think could really get their attention on those issues. We brought lawsuits that restored the religious exemption to say no to a vaccine in Mississippi. We prevented, over 10,000 members of the Air Force from being kicked out for refusing COVID vaccine. We struck down laws in DC that would allow doctors to vaccinate minors without parental consent. We took down a flu shot mandate in Massachusetts. We struck down the COVID vaccine requirement in California. So, and that's in California. So, I'm very hopeful. In fact, I'm hopeful based on actual real world results where these rights are being protected, where there's recognition that there are problems. And it's happening in the courthouses, it's happening in the state legislature, and it's happening at the federal government, not necessarily in Congress, but it's certainly happening over at HHS right now.
So the third part of this overhaul is, they call it the Denmark model. So RFK Jr. and the Trump administration explicitly directed this overhaul to align with the U.S., with Denmark. The acting CDC director, Jim O'Neill, noted that the U.S. was a scientific outlier compared to other developed nations that recommended far fewer doses for healthy infants. Can you explain or break that down for us? Why do you guys want to align with the Denmark model?
Well, I think that and I'd like to think of this as a first step, that, as a first step, was taking a look at the vaccines that we have as routine in the United States, but that many peer nations like Denmark don't, and ask the simple question of why. Why does Denmark, for example, have no Hep B vaccine on their schedule for routine use? Their vaccination rate for Hep B amongst children is like 0.01% or something, or 0.1%, something basically zero. But yet, and what can we learn from that, right? So they're not doing it, we are. What can we learn from that? That's an easier way to learn outcomes, I think, when you compare it to peer nations, because instead of trying to divine, well, if we didn't have a Hep B requirement in the US, what would the outcome be? It's tough to do that, a little tougher, where we have a real world example. So what was the outcome in Denmark? Well, let me tell you, they have effectively the same rate of chronic Hep B amongst children as we do in the United States, even though we vaccinate and they don't. And I'm talking about for non-Hep B positive mothers. For Hep B positive pregnant mothers, Denmark does still vaccinate, which is the 0.1% that get the Hep B vaccine for the most part in Denmark versus here. So there's a lesson in that. And when you look, even a little deeper, and you say, okay, well, how many shots in the arm of Hep B into babies do we need to give to stop one case of chronic Hep B amongst children? It turns out it's north of 100,000 apparently, based on actual historical data. So you got to vaccinate 100,000 kids, 3 shots each with a Hep B vaccine, to potentially prevent one case of chronic Hep B. Okay, so now you have the number needed to vaccinate. Well, how much harm does it cause? Well, from our assessment, it causes far more harm than that. Okay, babies die of Hep B vaccine. Babies don't die in the first day of life from hepatitis B itself. And babies have serious adverse reactions from hepatitis B vaccine. So, and those happen quick. So, when you really step back and try to look at it objectively, in my view, the policy doesn't make any sense from even a public health perspective. Again, I believe in freedom. You want to get them, you should be able to get them. You should have access to them. But having it on the routine schedule is problematic for 2 reasons. One is it gives the company immunity. When it's not routine, the immunity from the act doesn't attach. And two, it often results in mandates, which, by the way, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, a lot of places in the world don't even have mandates for vaccines.
You know, as a Canadian, I'm a sales engineer by trade, and I lost my career for not getting the COVID vaccine. I decided to trust my immune system over taking a shot that I didn't trust. And I remember looking at DeSantis in Florida. I was stuck in my log cabin in the middle of the woods, hiding from the population, and I was looking at DeSantis, and I'm like, this is how it should be. You want to take it? It's available. You don't? Awesome. Nobody can force you to take it. You're not going to lose your job. It's just common sense. You want to wear a mask? As you said earlier, no problem. Wear a mask. You don't? No problem. Nobody can force you. I don't understand how common sense is so
Well,
uncommon today.
because Nico, if you don't get it, then his vaccine doesn't work. You see, you're not understanding how this religion works. You need to be properly indoctrinated. See, your vaccine doesn't
Yeah.
work unless I take it. You understand?
Yeah, Doctor. I think you know Doctor Patrick Flynn. I'm pretty sure you guys follow each other, and he said something along those lines the other day that the only religion that's as strong as Christianity, or even stronger than Jesus, is the vaccination religion. So,
Oh,
um,
I agree with. In fact, I would actually say, even amongst religious leaders of various kinds, the vaccination is a stronger belief than the religion itself. And I'll give you a proof. There are because since you brought up there are archdioceses in the United States where they will not let your kid to be educated, even though they are as God created them, unless you modify them by a man-made product. Think about that. That's true of Jewish schools. That's true of Mormons. I mean, I don't. Our firm deals with all kinds of religious groups that have these issues, and unfortunately for many folks in all of these religions, no religious group is spared. Okay, I can tell you right now, and it varies. Not all archdioceses do this. Some archdioceses say we are all God's children, and they want to welcome them in and educate them in the Catholic faith and so forth, right? And they will not do that. I would say it's about a quarter of the archdioceses that will say, no, get out, okay? It's unfortunately a very significant proportion of the, it's interesting, for example, in the Jewish community, amongst the modern Orthodox, they are relentless. They will throw out kids immediately. In the ultra-religious Jewish community, they're like, no, you're God's child. They don't, for the most part, they will, it's the opposite. They have no issue with they will not exclude a kid. They're like, no, you got to learn Torah. In the Mormon church, where it's very centralized religion, for example, doing your 2 years, if you're familiar with this, right? Where they go around and they proselytize. It's a really important part of the Mormon religious journey. And they often require vaccines, and they don't really it's very difficult, I will say, to get excluded from that requirement. And so it's yes, unfortunately, belief in vaccines runs so deep, people are willing to exclude children from their own faith, educating them in their own faith based on them. That's incredible.
it's almost like they believe that their God didn't create them perfect. It's a bit.
Oh
It's just
no!
a
Oh
tiny
no!
bit
No!
hypocritical, huh?
No! It's God. You see, God messed up so bad that a child can't exist unless they get 25 injections by first year of life. I mean, think not only that, including the pregnant mother. I mean, it is the height of you. And the amazing part is the hubris in which this is approached, whether one believes in God or one believes in nature or whatever. You think that over X amount of time of evolution, or whether it's God's creation, however one views it, that you have figured it out with this, really, really rudimentary and non-precision. I mean, vaccines are they're so scattershot approach You think this is what, in each vial of an MMR vaccine, in every single dose, there's billions of pieces of human DNA and cellular fragments from the cultured cell line and aborted fetus in every single injection. Think about that.
You're kind of giving me an alley-oop pass on that one, because that kind of touches on the other question I want to ask you. You got the godfather of vaccines, Stanley Plotkin, to admit under oath that in one single study he used organs and tissues from 76 normally developed fetuses that were 3 months or older at the time of the abortions. Why do you think Big Pharma is trying to keep that a secret? Because they will use any word they can, like cell lines, not to say that, you know what, the vaccine you're injecting in your kid was developed based on aborted fetuses of the unborn babies. So there's a religious aspect to it, obviously, for the pro-life movement. But why do you think that they're trying to hide that so bad and not call it what it is?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people would have a visceral reaction to injecting their own child with billions of pieces of human DNA and fetal cell line from aborted fetal cell line. Imagine I put that in a cup and asked you to say, "Hey, drink that." You'd be like, "Of course not." Now, you say, "Of course, I'm not going to do that." If I took most vaccines and put them in a cup, you would be, and I listed the ingredients and I said, "Drink that," you'd be horrified. You would never drink it. Forget about injecting it deep into muscle tissue. Let's put that aside. So now, what they will say to you on that component, not to get too down the rabbit hole, but say, well, it's really just 2 or 3 fetuses total, right? Because like the first cell line is something called WI38, and that stands for Winstar Institute 38, meaning the 38th normally developed fetus that they aborted and cultured. Now, how did they do this? Just so you understand, just make sure folks understand how this process works. That's all in the study, by the way. There's nothing hidden about this, Nico. It's all in published literature. Just nobody reads it, right? But it's right there for the taking. And I cross-examined Plotkin on this. So first of all, the cells and the tissue culture needs to be alive, right? Can't be dead. Baby can't be dead. It needs to be alive, because viruses only grow in living cells for the most part. So if you're going to get like the rubella virus and you're going to create lots and lots of it for vaccine, you need cells to grow it in. Where are you going to get those cells? Well, for rubella, they've grown in human cells. That's really the only way they have found to really effectively grow them. All right, where are you going to get the human cells from? Well, in this instance, they had to figure out what's the best medium on which to grow them. So they take, in that one study, it was 70 something normally developed fetuses, and they take each of the fetus, again, all of the tissue needs to be alive, and they take every body part in that particular study. They took the lungs, they took the tongue, skin, kidneys, every eyeballs, organ. They then take every part of that baby's body, again, while the tissue remains alive, and they cut it up into 3-centimeter cubes. They then put the virus on it, and they see which one grows the virus the best. And so after experimenting, they ended up coming up with that initial cultural cell line, WI38. And eventually what happens is they run out of seed stock, and they have to have a new cell line. So then they go through this process again. And then they had something called MRC5, which is another cell line. And they're running out of seed stock for that. And this is an ongoing process to try and find new and better fetal cell lines to grow it on. So it's not just, a few, it's a lot of normally developed fetuses that effectively you need to have, again, remain alive. I mean, it's horrific. On top of that, I should add, if we're already talking about abortion, a lot of these studies also, when they're testing vaccines, they use something called humanized mice. So they take mice and they inject them with humanized cells to humanize the mice to do tests on them. That comes from other potentially aborted fetal cell lines. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
So it's it's marketing basically. They're, as you said, it's in the studies. You can find the information, but it's like when an app asks you to look at the fine print, nobody does. We just
Well, they
approve,
often just
approve,
lie
approve,
about
approve.
it. They'll often just lie about it. I mean, that's what you'll often see. I mean, there are, I have seen major hospitals and state public health put on their websites that there's no fetal cell involvement in vaccines. It's just a lie. It's just not true. I mean, if you go to the actual package insert or you go to the ingredient list, you can see WI38, MRC5. It literally says DNA and cellular fragments from. It actually has it right there in the ingredient list. It's not controversial. There's entire FDA guidance on how to break down the DNA into under certain base pair lengths. They are like, well, we don't want it to be too long, so you got to break it down to 225 or 200, under 500 base pair lengths of the fetal cell line DNA that remains in the vials. I mean, this is not. How do you think they get the virus? So anyway, but unfortunately, they'll all too often they'll just tell you that it's an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theory. What I've just been telling you, even though it's literally on the CDC website and the FDA website.
One of the last thing I wanted to ask your opinion on is pregnant women. So for the longest time, pregnant women or the pregnancy as a whole was recognized as sacred. Women were careful about everything, what they eat, anything that went into their bodies. They were very, very careful about it. And now in Canada, you're looking at 5 to 7 different injections while the woman is pregnant. And I have a 6-month-old son. So I know I just went through it with my wife. Our doctor was more concerned about, are you going to get the COVID-19 shot? Are you going to clamp the umbilical cord? Are you going to give the stem cell from the umbilical cord to science? Then they were about, how's your diet? How you been sleeping? Are you stressed? Are you still able to exercise? If not, why not? We spend half of our time in the U.S. and it's in Alabama. It's in the South. And down there, we had a midwife. That's all that mattered to her is, how do you feel? Are you eating well? The rest, she couldn't care less. She's provided thousands of home birth, just assisted into them. But unfortunately, the medical system is more concerned about vaccination than they are about the state of the body, the state of mind of our pregnant women. Again, is there something that we can do? What do doctors need to do to bring back that trust? Because if I go back to what you were saying earlier, it's going to be a very hard ship to turn if you want to change all the policies that are protecting big pharma. Which, if we forget that part and do what we're technically capable of doing on a human level, what do doctors need to do in order to bring back that trust? Because this is a sentiment that's not going away. Why are you trying to vaccinate me when I'm not supposed to eat certain foods right now?
I'll say 3 things about that. First of all, for most of those vaccines, they're not even licensed for pregnant women. Okay. So that's the first place to start. I would say to any OBGYN or doctor that wants to inject a pregnant woman, say, is that licensed for pregnant women? And if they say yes, say, I want to see the package insert, because it needs to say an indication that it's licensed for pregnant women. And virtually zero vaccines are. There's some exceptions. Number 2, if we pay doctors based on health outcomes, not service, so they get paid if they inject the vaccine, but they don't get paid for a healthy pregnancy. They get paid for a cesarean. They get paid less for a vaginal birth. So we need to financially incentivize doctors for outcomes and for other metrics. If we financially incentivize OBGYNs that they get paid if the pregnant woman eats better, if she does the things that we know are going to make for a better health outcome, then we might change the system. And hopefully Dr. Oz, who's the head of CMS now in the United States, who helps set what is compensated under Medicare and Medicaid, which then filters down into private insurance, will hopefully make those changes. And then finally, there's a really great book I read a long time ago called The Thinking Woman's Guide to Pregnancy. And there are other books similar to it. And, and it's written about the practices that occur when you go into labor in particular, and when you're pregnant, that, you walk into a hospital and basically you've got 24 hours to get that baby out after the water breaks. Well, if the reason that really is because they keep checking up there. Now, it's a sterile environment. If you don't keep checking, you're not going to introduce bacteria. But by constantly shoving things up there, you're introducing bacteria, and now you got to get the baby out. Whereas if you're at home and your water breaks, you could go 2, 3, you could go multiple. As long as you're not introducing anything into that sterile environment, you can go a long period of time. You don't have to end up getting cut open to have your baby come out, and that presents all kinds of complications when you have a cesarean. Or you go in and they're on a schedule for one reason or another. So you come in and they're like, all right, now we're going to give you some Pitocin, which causes harder contractions. Now we're going to strip the lining. We're going to break the water. And they go through all of these processes where, the body has a process. Pregnancy is not a medical condition. Labor is not a medical condition. It is a natural human process. It can be turned into an emergency in largest times by the interventions. In Denmark, for example, since we're in Denmark, I think they have, at least the last time I checked, now it's been a decade since I read about this stuff. Okay, so I'm talking from like a decade old knowledge. But from when I read about it back then, my kids are older now. They have back then at least about a 6% cesarean rate, where we in this country, for private hospitals, was 30 to 40, for public hospitals 25%. Why? Are Danish women just like Viking
Tougher
thing or something? I mean, no, it's that a third of the women in Denmark give birth at home. At least, again, back when I was, a third in birthing centers are kind of like home, and only a third go in the hospital. Even then, it's less medicalized because they don't treat it in the same way. They don't approach childbirth in the manner they do. And so, to your point about midwives, I've seen that directly. We've worked with midwives. Our firm has, and it's incredible. I've given thousands of births at home in a calm, nurturing setting with a midwife who's super experienced. I set up a tub, and then a woman goes in the tub and gets into the more natural position for giving birth, rather than on your back, which is not the natural way to give birth and can result in other issues and so forth. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent, but so yeah, that's a whole nother issue.
But that's a good point you're making about the water breaking, because that's what happened to my wife. She's one of the 10% of women that her water broke, and she wasn't even sure that her water broke. We didn't go to the hospital for another day, and then I think it had been 48 hours when my son was born, and she did it naturally. She did it, no drugs, no nothing. She soldiered up, because she pushed for almost 3.5 hours, 4 hours. And my wife's not a big girl, right? She's 120 pounds. Ouch. Yep. I got a lot more respect for my wife after. Yes, sir.
Well, you better. Is that your first one? Your first kid?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
It's usually it usually takes a lot longer with the first one versus the subsequent ones, at least from my anecdotal experience.
Yeah, well, I believe that you're right from a limited experience that I have as well, but we're very blessed to have had a midwife that kept contact with us, that we could just call, and we called her from the hospital, and she said exactly what you said. It's, don't let them poke you up there. Your water broke. Boo-hoo, big deal. Who cares? The baby's going to come when the baby's going to come. If it lasts 4 or 5 days, there might be a problem. but 3
Right.
days or less, you don't have to worry about it at all. So we were very fortunate to have found a midwife in the US before we came back to Canada. But what advice would you give to kind of arm the pregnant women, the expecting
Oh,
parents, the new parents to get ready for the unrelentless attacks from the medical system, as in you need to vaccinate your kid, you need to vaccinate yourself when you're pregnant, because they never stop. They're relentless.
well, I think the most critical thing is picking the right provider. If that is the way your provider approaches you, find somebody new. Like you said, find a great midwife. I mean, midwives who do home births in America, I mean, you find them in pretty much every state, and they're incredible. They are. The notion that pregnancy is a medical issue is a new found approach to pregnancy and childbirth. So that's the most important thing, is finding the right provider, and pick up a book like the one I mentioned earlier, and read about it. And obviously this is not for everybody. Everybody should decide what is most appropriate for them, but talk to their midwife about how doing a home birth, with your midwife there. That's an option. And then you can have complete control, along with your midwife, of the labor process. It's a lot. If in your situation, Nico, had you gone in right away after your wife's water broke, and they had the policy that many places do, 24 hours, and that baby's coming out. Now maybe they could have accelerated it by, like I said, Pitocin, stripping the lining, doing all these other stuff. But if they couldn't, she could have ended up with cesarean, which is a
You know, the
serious medical procedure.
100%. But you're absolutely right when you're saying that they're treating birth as a medical condition. It's the most natural thing that ever occurred on this planet. Without it, we wouldn't exist. How more natural could it be? But one thing that
Yeah.
I've learned, like I'm a bigger guy, right? I'm 6'1", 235, 240, and my job was not to take care of my wife. My mother-in-law was there to help my wife go through it. She has 3 kids. She knows a lot. She knows a lot more about what it is to give birth than it is that I do. I was there to make sure they did not touch my son, that they were not taking him away from our supervision, that I had eye contact on him the
Yeah.
whole time. Like, he was born at 4.8 pounds, so he was born small, but he was at term. He was at 37 or 38 weeks. Like, he came naturally. He wasn't induced. And I stayed 3 or 4 days in the I don't remember what the term is. It's
The
kind of an
NICU.
ICU. Yes, exactly. And I slept on those lawn
Yeah.
chairs right next to my son, holding him, as in nobody's touching that little boy.
You're
I
a
was
good
just
dad.
there to well, that's my job as a man, right? Is to
It
protect him.
is.
And my wife was recuperating from destroying her inside. I had to
Well,
protect my son.
there's a few other benefits I will point out to having a home birth. Again, that's an individualized decision that I have seen. First is that when oftentimes at the hospital, they will almost insist on clamping and cutting very relatively quickly, where they deprive the baby of sometimes almost half of the blood volume that the baby should be getting. There's a reason that the placenta continues to pump even after the baby comes out. It's filling the baby with blood. It makes no sense to me. I don't understand why you wouldn't let the baby have its full measure of blood volume right away. So that's number one. Number two is that right as the baby comes out, one of the first things to do is to put the baby right on the mother's chest and even let it start nursing, because when it does, that causes the release of certain chemicals that result in the placenta naturally detaching. Instead, which you'll see in hospital settings sometimes, and beyond me to understand, is they'll start tugging at the cord. Well, what that can cause is the placenta can then detach unnaturally. And then what does that cause? That causes the bleeding that then becomes the emergency that then requires the Pitocin to stop the hemorrhaging. It causes the issue. There's a natural process to these things. Nature God has come up with ways to make this process work as smoothly as possible. That doesn't mean there aren't complications. There certainly are, and when there are, absolutely. But but we don't need to create complications by pulling on the cord, not giving the baby its full measure of blood, not putting the baby on the mother's chest right away, not letting it start nursing, not letting the placenta detach naturally, right? Because they want to get things done quickly right after the baby's born. It's really, they're trying to be more efficient, but they're creating more problems along the way. So, but when you're in a hospital setting, it's very difficult to control those factors in that, because they have their way of doing things. When you do it at home, you can control those things. And if an issue arises, you can always go to the hospital. That's always an option. I can say that, with the midwives that we've, been involved with here at the firm, I always ask, well, how often do you ever have to go to the hospital? It's like virtually never, and if they do, they say it's usually something that they identify well in advance. There's really some kind of complication. It's never like in the middle they've ever really had to go, rushing to the hospital.
And if you do it in the hospital like we did, we had to sign unconsent forms, basically, to say we don't consent to this. You're not going to clamp. You're not going to take the placenta. You cannot force anything on us. We refuse to do it. You're here to deliver the baby, then F off. We're done. Leave. We don't
Well,
need you anymore.
Well, it sounds like they're more agreeable in Canada to your wishes, potentially.
My wife was worried that I'd get arrested. It was actually a worry of her that something bad would happen because she knows me very well. So, I got a trick for you. That's the midwife that gave us that trick. It's absolutely brilliant. She's like, if you're having a home birth, because we weren't in Alabama, we were in Canada, and if you decide to have a home birth and there's complications during, don't drive to the hospital. Call an ambulance. Because chances are they're not going to transport to the hospital. They're going to help you give birth right there because you're in the middle of it. So you get free assistance at home without having to go to the hospital. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of clever. That's kind of smart.
Yeah. Well, in any event, it's something for, if anybody out there is pregnant, to really think about and consider. and I'll add one last point to your last point, which is that pregnancy and childbirth should be a beautiful moment. It should be a joyous moment. It should be one filled with like the best feelings, the best emotions, especially for the woman after she's given the birth. And it shouldn't be filled with massive releases of cortisol, where you feel like you are at war with folks who just want to jab, prod, poke, your wife and your kid. It's not a healthy experience. It's again akin to, what you'll experience in some pediatric offices, where you're expressing your wishes, but oftentimes, unfortunately, you end up with, kind of the worst possible situation. Our firm gets calls from parents who's just had their baby and they don't want to give a Hep B vaccine, and the hospital is threatening to call CPS and them, Child Protective Services. Think about that. You just had a child, and you're in the middle of this war in a hospital setting. It's the worst possible feeling. And until, I would say, obstetricians and maternity wards start respecting parental wishes, why patronize them unless you have to? Again, consider the alternative of having a child at home. It's a beautiful experience.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're bang on time. I'm going to respect your time, Aaron. I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to thank you for joining us tonight, for your knowledge. And I don't know if there's something you want to plug, you want to say that's going to end up on the internet, but the floor is yours.
Oh, well, I would just say this, for anybody in Canada who's listening to this, who wants to make sure that you're secure your rights regarding vaccination, especially because Canada has less issues than the US when it comes to mandates for childhood vaccines. But I wouldn't be complacent about that. I would make sure, for any Canadian out there in your province, go meet with your local elected representative. Educate them. It's so important that they be knowledgeable. You don't have to go and give them a full education. Just go in and show them that, some of the vaccines that they were, don't prevent transmission. If you go once a year, gather a few folks, go down, set up a meeting, go meet with them, educate them, it has a massive impact. Most, especially at the provincial level, their constituents don't often show up. And when like 5 of them in there show up, want to have a meeting, they're like, oh my God, they want to meet with me. They'll have that meeting with you. So go down there and, teach them just a few basic things, basic stuff that, can't be contested based on the literature. There's links to a lot of the stuff on my book. ICANN's website, icanndecide.org, has a whole bunch of material as well. So that would be my pitch. Safeguard your rights. Don't be complacent about it, because waiting until they're taken away is often waiting too long.
Well said. Thanks. Thank you very much for your time, and all the best to you and your family.
Thank you, Nico. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.